Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
The way I constantly think about this is, do I want this thing done perfectly now? Do I want this homework assignment to be perfect? Do I want this grade to be perfect? Do I want the dishwasher loaded perfectly now? Or do I want a kid who knows how to do it themselves next time?
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Today's an exciting day, Kylie. Hello, everyone. Dr. Justin Coulson here, dad of 6 daughters and the author of 6 books, here with Kylie, my wife and co-host, and, honey, somebody that I've been wanting to talk to for years. And we finally managed to get hold of her, Jessica Lahey, New York Times bestselling author. She wrote The Gift of Failure, How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children Can Succeed. Jess is a mum of a couple of kids who are in there. Well, one of them's an adult now. The other one's just finishing high school. So she's got them through. They've survived. They've thrived. Jessica, the book was published about half a dozen years ago, but so many parents haven't heard of it, especially here in Australia. And we're going to talk about it today. We're so grateful that you've joined us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Jess, the book is called The Gift of Failure. And I was just flicking through the front few pages of it, and I found this quote that just jumped out at me. It says, or you said, out of love and desire to protect our children's self-esteem, we have bulldozed every uncomfortable bump and obstacle out of their way, clearing the manicured path that we hoped would lead to success and happiness. Unfortunately, in doing so, we have deprived our children of the most important lessons of childhood. The setbacks, mistakes, miscalculations and failures we have shoved out of our children's way are the very experiences that teach them how to be resourceful, persistent, innovative and resilient citizens of this world. So can you just kind of, I guess, dissect that a little bit for us and explain where you're going with this?
I've been a teacher for a long time, but when I wrote The Gift of Failure, I was teaching in middle school here in the US. That's, kids 12 through 14. And by the way, I love that age group. I love middle school kids. They're just the best. I call them pupa people. And I had noticed that the parents of my students were doing a lot of things that were really making it more difficult for their kids to learn. And of course, they were doing these things in the name of helping their kids and, bulldozing things out of their way and making it so that they had lots of opportunities and all that sort of thing. And that was really frustrating to me. And I was on this super high horse about it because, I'm the noble educator and you're messing things up for me, until I realized that that's exactly what I was doing with my own children. And I had parented one of my kids into such helplessness that he was 9 and he couldn't even tie his own shoes. So I had to get humble real fast. And luckily I have the best job in the world, which is getting to research and answer the questions that I have and translate that for a popular audience. And that's how The Gift of Failure was born. And really that idea of, depriving kids of learning opportunities all originally came through my teacher brain and then got filtered through the parent brain because I had to deal with it myself.
I like what you've said, though. Parents are doing this with the very best of intentions, Jess. It's not like they're saying,
of course.
It's not like they're saying, I need to stop my child failing because I don't want them to grow or I want to mess them up.
No.
It's almost like there's an understanding. When you talk to any adult about this logically, everyone says, yeah, of course failure helps you to grow. Of course it's the struggles that make you stronger. What is it about raising children that makes us, with the best of intentions, step in and stop our children from having these experiences?
Because we don't like seeing our kids frustrated. That's emotionally challenging. I wrote this book on this and I overstep all the time. It makes things go faster. My kid, it greases the wheels. Things go faster. I get things done the way I want them done. I don't have to worry so much about whether or not my kid's going to take care of it themselves. If I just do it myself, if I nag, then I can, get some emotional insurance that this isn't going to get worse and that things will get done. And I think in the end, we're really also worried about, our parenting report card. We're worried about other people are going to think about us if our kids don't, do the things they're supposed to do or get the grades we want them to get or get into the school that we want them to get into. And so, even in the research, there's at places where researchers see examples of what's overparenting or what's called directive parenting, some of those behaviors get amplified when the researchers tell the parents that other parents will be judging their child's work after the experiment, because it's that competitive pressure that comes from other parents or the teachers or whatever it is. If we fall down on the job, we're always worried that we're going to get judged by our kids' friends' parents or the other parents in the parking lot or the teachers of our parents. So, it has more to do with us than it does with them. Our worries that they're going to feel stupid or get frustrated and be able to decompensate, those are usually unfounded, but it makes us feel better to step in and help.
Jess, is this a generational thing? Like, I don't feel like my parents felt the same way about that kind of judgment of other parents as I have, kind of going through parenting. I remember, as a young mum, the competition that was involved with, my child started walking when they were 7 months old. And, all of those kinds of conversations. Is this something that's kind of, I guess, come into parenting in the last little while, or is this been an age-old thing?
The easy way to explain it is that we're having kids later after having been in the workforce for longer or having had a lot more education. I know I'm guilty on all those counts, and I wanted to use the tools that I got in work, spreadsheets. Yay, I can do Excel spreadsheets about my kids' input and output, and I can map their bedtime and their sleep schedules and all that stuff. But, and then on top of that, we're so used to having, short-term evaluations on our whatever it is we're doing for work. And it's really hard when you have this baby, this child that is so precious to you. And this is like the most important job you have to do well. And suddenly we're getting no report card on that. So we start to look for, our own rewards in their accomplishments. And there's a whole history chapter in the book, The Gift of Failure, because this is a complicated picture. But in the end, it's, having kids later, having kids after, understanding, using the tools of business and education in order to apply to, evaluating how our kids are doing.
There's a whole literature on what we call parental investment in children. Yeah. And the research certainly shows that we're more invested in our children now than perhaps ever in the history of the world, in terms of the expectations we have on them, in terms of the financial input that we have into their lives. And the more we put in financially and time-wise and all that kind of thing, the more we kind of expect to extract from them. Plus, with the increasingly pressured world, we want our children to grow up to have six-figure incomes and have the nice profession. And so all of that expectation, we can't afford for them to fail. They've got to get straight A's on their report card. They've got to get into the right course. I feel like society's become so unhealthy for families, so unhealthy for children when we buy into that. And of course, most of us do, because it's hard to find alternative ways forward. In just a sec, we're going to ask you how we're supposed to overcome this. But first, we need to take a quick break.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Imagine a home where discipline got results without anyone having to feel bad or in trouble. The Do's and Don'ts of Discipline is a webinar to help parents set limits with love, compassion, and humanity. Find it now at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we're talking with Jessica Lahey about her book, The Gift of Failure.
Jess, my observation is that parents generally react really poorly when their children fail, or even when they fail to succeed. They don't necessarily fail, but they just don't get the outcome that the parent wants. I'll give you a couple of examples. They get 80% on a test. And what does the parent say to them? Why did you only get 80%? What about the other 20%? The child loses a soccer game or doesn't convert a goal or hit a basket in a basketball match, and the parent says, you've got to defend down that left side better, or you've got to get that shot off faster. There's all of this constant correction and direction, and it's natural because we want our children to succeed. But what would you say to the parent who says, I'm just trying to help them fulfill their potential? Like, there's nothing the matter with what I'm doing.
One of the books I love the most when I'm talking about this stuff is Tim Harford's book, Adapt. And he talks about the fact that in business, when you have when you make a mistake, when you have some sort of gaffe, when you have a business failure, it's the businesses that ignore the failure, pretend the failure didn't happen, blame it on someone else, who are, going to make those mistakes again. It's the businesses that really dissect what happened and put things in place so that it won't happen again. Those are the businesses that are more likely to succeed because they're learning from their mistakes. And, that's a great analogy for kids as well. And the reason that, one of the things that's so hard for us to grasp is that the way I constantly think about this is, do I want this thing done perfectly now? Do I want this homework assignment to be perfect? Do I want this grade to be perfect? Do I want the dishwasher loaded perfectly now? Or do I want a kid who knows how to do it themselves next time? Do I want a kid who's prepared to do it on their own next time? Do I want a kid who knows how to use a calendar so that next time he is actually doing it himself rather than my nagging him into a state of submission so that he'll just do it and get it over with? That sort of long-term view of, the difference between like how I want things to go in this second and how I want things to go eventually for my child. I think that's the mantra that I sort of have to keep thinking about all the time, the process over the end product, always valuing that process of. And so when you talk about the bad grade coming home, the problem is what we tend to do is react to that grade by withdrawing our love, or in a very real sense, we tend to be silent, which kids can often read as withdrawal of love based on outcome. But if we're constantly focused on the process of learning, the process of figuring out what to do differently next time, the process of what to leave behind and what to bring forward with you for the next iteration, then that's sort of the balm to my whole need to fix, which is, this is a long-term process. What is he going to learn out of this? And how do I keep my nose out of it so that he can learn as much as possible?
There's a process that I go through with my kids, and I try to share this with parents as often as I can. And what you've tapped into really, really directs us into that. Rather than giving my evaluation, I say to my kids, well, how did that feel? What?
I actually say that a lot to parents when I say, when the kids come to you with the drawing and they're like, what do you think? What do you think? And, where our reflex is to say, oh, it's so beautiful. The problem is that over time, and this happens with teaching too, over time, kids will start to bring you crappier and crappier content and put it up in your face to test you. And then at a certain point, you're saying, oh, it's so beautiful to a scribble. And then they have no faith in our judgment anymore. And the best thing we can do is when the kid comes to us to show us this thing is we say, well, what do you think of it? Or, how do you think you played today? Or how do you think you performed on that test? And since as humans, we're so bad at metacognition, that's a great opportunity for us to exercise that a little, understanding what we do and don't know, and developing that internal compass of quality.
Yeah, builds that self-awareness muscle.
Yeah.
Jess, one of the other things that you said in the book that really stood out to me in relation to, I guess, the way our children perceive the things that we say is this little quote that I found at the beginning of the book. It says, every time we rescue, hover, or otherwise save our children from a challenge, we send a really clear message that we believe they are incompetent, incapable, unworthy of our trust. Further, we teach them to be dependent on us and thereby deny them the very education and competence we are put here on this earth to hand down.
Boom.
It's so powerful.
And I didn't realize that's what my kid was hearing until I really had to confront like the shoe tying thing. Because essentially that's what was happening is, every single time it was time for us to go somewhere and I said, it's faster if I do it, or here, just let me do that for you. Essentially what he was hearing was, I don't really think you can do that. And the problem is it led us to some pretty dark places. It led him to have a crisis of confidence. It led him to have a real worries about my opinion of him, and a lot of keeping secrets from me about what he could and couldn't do because he didn't want to face something. He was so embarrassed by the fact that he, for example, couldn't tie his shoes. We had to do some real fancy footwork to get ourselves out of that situation because, they had a hockey or a skating outing coming up. And, if you've seen skates lately, they have a lot of, well, I guess now they have latches, but before they had laces. And, if he couldn't tie his shoelaces on his sneakers, he certainly couldn't go on that field trip. And so we had to work really hard to like practice so that he could go on that field trip.
You've just reminded me, we have, we've got 6 kids. We're time poor.
Yeah.
We just need stuff
Yeah.
done. And while I think that we've got our parenting reasonably well dialed in, we certainly don't make any claims to parenting perfection. And our 7-year-old still doesn't know how to tie up her laces, Jess. And you've just reminded me that we've been buying Velcro because it just means that the mornings...
They slip-on shoes, Velcro, it makes it so much easier. But think about, I thought about it this way. The Velcro shoes, the slip-on shoes, whatever. And then we're left with the laces shoes as like the sad little leftovers no one can wear. But it was a little bit, and this ages me, but it was the reason my dad taught me how to drive a stick shift, right? Because if I'm ever in a situation where someone couldn't drive, I had to be able to drive that car for a matter out of safety. If someone was drunk and they couldn't drive, I had to be able to take over. And my dad saw that as a real safety measure. And with the shoe thing, there's gonna come a time when and that was sort of the realization for me is that, I've been, casting aspersions on all these parents who are doing too much for their kids. And here I am doing the exact same thing. I have no right to judge. And I think that's been my attitude as much as possible in my writing, which is I have no right to judge. But here's what I've done. And here's what I've learned from the research on engaging kids in their own learning and learning from their mistakes.
Your dad and I would get on well. I'm teaching my daughters to drive a manual or a stick shift as well. We're up to daughter number 3.
Oh, the poor man! The poor man had to listen to me grind the gears in his beloved car, in order to make my life safer. I'm sure it was terrible for him.
we went and bought a cheap clunker because we were just too scared to have them destroy our good car. Jess, we're talking about, and I think what you're really emphasizing is this idea of when we let go, but not in a neglectful way. When we get,
of course,
when we let go in an affirming way, what we essentially say to our child is, I believe in you. I think that you're competent and capable. And I believe that you can do this just fine without me having to do it all for you. Our time is up, but this is a podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers now. We would love to have you come back because there's been such a fun conversation already and really dive into the process of what it is to let go as a parent, but in a way that helps children to develop that competence. Would you be happy to come and join us again and continue this discussion?
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, we'll talk to you again in about a week's time about The Gift of Failure, because the book by Jessica Lahey, New York Times bestseller, The Gift of Failure, How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children Can Succeed, has got so much to offer. If you've enjoyed the podcast, we would love it if you'd leave a rating and review. Those ratings and reviews help people to find the podcast and make their families happier. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about making your family happier, you can get it all at happyfamilies.com.au.